Nick Carboni joined once again by Julian Council of Locked On Panthers. I got to say, Julian, anytime you're here on a Monday after a Sunday, something happened. Something happened. Something
good happened, something bad happened. Really depends on your perspective, as the Carolina Panthers did something that we talked about last night was always inevitable. Matt Rhule fired after a 1-4 start here to this 2022 season. Finishes off his career here in Carolina at 11-27 overall. 1-27 in games where the Panthers allowed 17 points. And that is just a bar. That is way too high for the defense to have to clear every week. And really the thing that hurt Matt Rhule in the end was not being able to get a quarterback. He tried Teddy Bridgewater. They moved off of him. Sam Darnold. We saw how that was a disaster last year. And through 5 games, Baker Mayfield was worse than both of those guys. So Matt Rhule, great job in college at Temple and Baylor, but could not get it done at the NFL level, which is not news because most college coaches in this situation fail. And unfortunately, David Tepper's first NFL head coaching hire failed.
All right, what do you think the biggest difference was? Like, obviously, that did flesh itself out. The fact that it is so tough to be a successful college head coach even and translate that into the professional ranks. What do you think the biggest difference was on the field?
It's hard to say because defensively, they figured things out. I just think overall for the Panthers is the coaching aspect of it. Because in the NFL, it's a level playing field. It's not like at Ohio State where you have all the money, all the boosters, and you can win and get 5 stars. Same thing at Alabama and Georgia. In the NFL, the salary cap league, everyone plays by the same rules. So the best way to be able to differentiate yourself is with the head coach and the quarterback. And they had one of the worst quarterbacks in the league the last 3 years as far as quarterback play. And then head coach Matt Rhule, when you're playing basically one-score games week in, week out, we saw they never at any point came back to win a game when in the final 2 minutes. And we saw a lot with Teddy Bridgewater back in 2020. With the last 2 years, they really were never in those positions. So it's coaching, really, that separated them on the field. You can try and find, okay, well, defensively they got better. Special teams has improved this year. What exactly was it? Clock management, just a game manage overall. Matt Rhule, just as a CEO head coach, just did not inspire enough to get his guys to play at a high enough level. They sat there and went to bat for him the last couple of weeks. But clearly there was some sort of disconnect on the field on Sundays when they played.
In that quarterback carousel, you go from Teddy Bridgewater after cutting Cam Newton to Sam Darnold to Baker Mayfield. Where does the blame lie there? We think that Matt Rhule had full control over the roster. David Tepper, though, certainly has his, say in quarterback decisions especially, and there's a general manager too. So if that was ultimately Matt Rhule's downfall, is it also his fault?
Yes and no. I look at David Tepper. He's not meddling. He's an active participant in what's going on here in Charlotte. And as much as people wanted Matt Rhule out, I look at the owner. And Tepper did admit at the press conference earlier today that he is responsible for everything that happens here in Carolina. Matt Rhule was his hire. He decided to get rid of Ron Rivera so that he could bring in Matt Rhule here to Carolina, who had only 1 year as an assistant offensive line coach of experience in the NFL. And the staff he brought in here with Joe Brady, who barely had any NFL experience at all, had never been a play caller at a high level or really at all. He was the one who was tasked with the OC. And we saw how that worked out when he was fired at the end of at the middle part of last season. Things just did not work out. And the quarterback situation, I look back at David Tepper when they mutually parted ways with Marty Herney, and he said you have to be in constant pursuit of that quarterback. We knew right then and there that Teddy Bridgewater would not return. That led to Sam Darnold whiffing on Matthew Stafford. Deshaun Watson never wanted to come here. They even called out Russell Wilson. It falls on Rhule, yes, but David Tepper's the one who gave him all that control. David Tepper's the one who said, hey, we need to move on and get somebody else. David Tepper is the one who writes the check. So, yeah, it's Matt Rhule's fault, but it's also the owner's fault.
All right, so I'm among the group that thinks this was the time to do it. I know it's only 5 games into the season. The season largely just seems lost at this point. Baker Mayfield's not working out. Maybe just have a new voice, have a new process. But I understand why there's a lot of people that say you gave him the 3rd year. It's not going to change much for this season. No. Why do you think David Tepper ultimately made this decision after week 5?
When you look at Sunday and you look at the crowd there, he said it didn't really factor into much of what he wanted to do as far as moving off of Matt Rhule. But he said that the energy was not what it was in the first 4 weeks of the season, where the Panthers had played 3 really close games against Cleveland, against New York, and then against the Saints in week 3. Then you saw the double-digit loss last week against Arizona. Then on Sunday, really the feeling right at the beginning of the game was this is not going to be close, as they finally gave up a opening drive touchdown, I think the first time in 21 games. It just, the energy level, it felt like a funeral. You were there in the building yesterday. I mean, I wasn't there, but just watching back home, it didn't
if
feel.
If they wear red at a funeral, yeah.
It felt different.
Yeah.
So I think when you get to that point, as much as the guys are behind Matt Rhule, but when you get that feeling that they're not 100% committed on the field with their effort, then you got to make a change. And it gives someone like Steve Wilkes, a Charlotte native, went to Dub C, West Charlotte High School, played at App State, an opportunity for 12 games to show that he should be a head coach again. And my hope is that he'll get a real opportunity to get the job if he does succeed moving forward the rest of the season.
All right, before we launch into the opportunity Steve Wilkes gets, Phil Snow is not going to get an opportunity to coach this defense for the remainder of the 12 games. Yeah. David Tepper, all but said that was Steve Wilkes' decision. What did you make of that?
It makes sense. Steve Wilkes is here now as the head coach, and he has the autonomy to go out there and to bring in whoever he wants. And Al Holcomb is his guy. He's worked with Al Holcomb in the past, back when both him and Al were here in Carolina under Ron Rivera. So, of course, you want to empower Al to be in a defensive coordinator situation that could help him moving forward. Because this is not just an audition for Steve Wilkes to potentially be a head coach here in Carolina or maybe elsewhere. It's also an audition for someone like Al Holcomb to show that, hey, maybe I can be a defensive coordinator and lead a defense elsewhere in Carolina if I'm not a part of the next head coach's plans. And let's also recognize that Phil Snow's followed Matt Rhule since 2013 at Temple. He's a Rhule guy. If Matt Rhule ends up getting a job in college, whether it's at Nebraska or Wisconsin or Arizona State or Georgia Tech, who knows, he's going to go with Matt Rhule. So if that's the case, why not move off of him? And Steve Wilkes has also been a defensive coordinator, and he's working in the NFL. He has just as much, probably more experience, honestly, more experience working in the NFL defensive-wise than Phil Snow has. So, of course, he's not going to sit back here now as a head coach and have to answer, have a game plan with Phil Snow. So he probably feels like philosophically they're not on the same page. Let's go ahead and move on because you're going to leave anyways, and I want to kind of lay the blueprint of this defense under what I feel like we should be doing defensively. So I totally understand why he would do that.
Julian, all interim coaches and managers have a wink-wink opportunity to win the job.
Yeah.
12 games left. This team is 1-4. You're dealing with a quarterback room of Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and P.J. Walker. Is that a real opportunity to win this job?
It's hard. Yesterday's problems are still today's problems. If you thought the Panthers had a quarterback problem yesterday, well, that hasn't changed, especially that Baker Mayfield is expected to be out for a couple weeks of a high ankle sprain. Sam Darnold, as Matt Rhule was telling us last week, isn't anywhere close to returning. And Matt Corral, the rookie, who we would love to see play right now, is out for the season with the Lisfranc foot injury. So it's left to P.J. Walker. And we've seen P.J. have success. He's 2-0 as a starter. But that was against the Lions, and the defense shut him out. And last year against Arizona, the defense was fantastic, and Cam Newton brought the energy level to score those 2 touchdowns in his first 2 touches. I don't look at P.J. Walker as a high-level backup quarterback. He can possibly prove that he deserves an opportunity elsewhere with the next 12 games. I just don't see how P.J. Walker, the quarterback situation is any better than it was. Now, he can't be worse than Baker because Baker was worse than Teddy and worse than Sam. So the hope is P.J. can help him out. Just looking at it, though, you're 1-4. You have injuries. J.C. Horn, we don't know how the severity of the hip is just yet. Jeremy Chin's on IR with the hamstring. Xavier Woods and Frankie Louvu both were out on Sunday. Who knows what their status is moving forward? And there's the potential that there could be a fire sale of guys like Christian McCaffrey and Brian Burns and DJ Moore that plenty of contenders would covet. And the Panthers need draft picks. So we'll see how much of a chance it is. I don't expect that David Tepper is going to keep Steve Wilkes here. But he did say if he does an incredible job, he'll get an opportunity. I just still have a hard time actually believing that's going to come to fruition.
Yeah, what you mentioned right there. This deal gets done well ahead of the NFL's trade deadline.
Yeah.
Teams are already inquiring about players like Christian McCaffrey, as they have been throughout, but now it's at this part of the timeline where it might make more sense. Who could you see the Panthers moving off of?
Yeah, McCaffrey's certainly a name. It would make a lot of sense. I've seen conflicting reports. I saw it stationed up in Buffalo was saying that the Bills had inquired, but Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, a more reliable source, went out there and said that the Panthers have not had any talks with Buffalo this season. Now, in the offseason, there were some talks, but this season, they haven't had any talks about Christian McCaffrey's availability. Scott Fitterer did say, the Panthers general manager, that he would be in on every deal. So if someone does call and offers something that they cannot refuse, and I would imagine the price today for Christian McCaffrey is higher than it would have been before the season, considering he's been healthy so far. You know, he had the issue with the quad a week ago, but he's played in every game. He's looked like his old self. Maybe hasn't gotten the opportunities that he should have in this new Ben McAdoo offense. He's a name. Brian Burns is going to be in need of a contract coming up this offseason. Might you try to get ahead of it and let him go and see what you can get for him? And the Panthers only have their first, second, fourth, and fifth round picks. If you're a head coach, that is going to be a deterrent for you to want to come and take this job. Also, the fact that Matt Rhule was fired 5 weeks into the season, you're going to wonder, do you have a owner who pulls the trigger too happy? And do you have a general manager who doesn't value picks? So certainly try and get those picks back and to entice someone to want to come here, it would make sense to move off of these players, especially if you can get a valuable asset for them.
All right, moving back to the head coaching position and potential vacancy outside of Steve Wilkes. Obviously, it's early. There is a number of names being thrown out right now. 99% of them are unavailable right now as we speak in October. What's the resume need to be for the next Panthers head coach?
Well, typically, when you see changes like that, you want to get the opposite of what you had. Matt Rhule wasn't an offensive guy. He wasn't a defensive guy. He was more of a CEO, which, that can work in the NFL, can certainly work in college. It's worked in college. I'm imagining, as far as experience, David Tepper is going to want someone who has more than just 1 year as an assistant offensive line coach in the NFL of experience. He's going to probably want to get a veteran head coach. So we're going to hear names like Sean Payton. That's going to cost a lot. I don't really see why New Orleans would approve of trading or giving whatever compensation and allowing Sean Payton to go to Carolina 1 year after leaving there. Also, Dan Quinn's a name. He was a high commodity last year, decided to go back to Dallas. We know what he did in Atlanta. 28-3, blew that lead. Never forget. I don't know if that's going to be something that's going to have the fan base all that excited if he comes here, but I would not be surprised if they're going to try and go out there and get a retread head coach. Bill O'Brien, his agency is CAA. They're really pushing him for college jobs. Quite possibly could Bill O'Brien come here to Carolina, where he had success in Houston up until he had too much control. And that's kind of what led Matt Rhule to this path where he had too much control, also not enough experience. So I'd imagine someone who has a strong, deep NFL background and possibly a former head coach would be what David Tepper is looking for. Even though I don't love retreads, that's likely the path. I would love to see a guy like DeMeco Ryans, the defensive coordinator for the 49ers, who has been outstanding, get an opportunity, but it also means, hey, what are you going to do offensively?
All right, so you mentioned there full control for a head coach. David Tepper did say he thinks it's probably more appropriate to have more balance between head coach and general manager. But I want to end on this, Julian. David Tepper said that the Panthers need to build a winning culture. He has been in place for a handful of years. Obviously, a winning culture is not in place. Are you optimistic that he can make that happen? Because there is no other choice for Panthers fans. He is the owner.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't fire the owner, and we know of no misconduct issues that could potentially get him out of town like we saw with Jerry Richardson. That's basically the only way to move off an owner unless they decide, hey, I just don't want to own the team anymore, which is very lucrative, and David Tepper clearly likes money. I don't have that much confidence. The Panthers are 27-43 since David Tepper took over, and I don't necessarily count all the losses and the wins that he had when Ron Rivera was here because that's who he inherited. But if you look at the handpicked guy he brought in here, Matt Rhule, that's 11-27. Not great. And let's not forget that. Let's also look at Charlotte FC. Miguel Angel Ramirez was his first manager with them. Lasted 14 matches. Look at how things worked out in Rock Hill, or haven't worked out in Rock Hill, and are playing out legally. What gives you any indication that David Tepper can get it right now after that, backing out of Eastland Mall? We can look at the timing of how that worked out, but the fact that they backed out of that when that was the original plan, that does not lead me to have much faith that David Tepper can get things fixed. And he didn't really seem to be someone who really appreciated the questions that the media was asking him today when he was being pressed on all of his failures. And I get it. It's very public. It's personal to him. He moved off away from Appaloosa management so that he could come here and to put all his full passion in the Panthers. And so far, it has not worked out. So do I have confidence in the owner? No.
All right, I know this is bouncing around, but I want to get to everything. General Manager Scott Fitterer, he's on a different track than Matt Rhule. He was brought in 1 year after him. Right now, he is still the general manager. Do you think he should be the general manager going forward?
Typically, general managers are able to get 2 head coaches. Not often you get 3. I mean, Howie Roseman up there in Philadelphia is one of them. He's gotten 3. He's also won a Super Bowl. It's tough for me right now. Scott Fitterer did not bring in Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule, if he had as much control as it's reported and believed to have been, then I do think Scott Fitterer deserves an opportunity to bring in his own head coach. And, of course, David Tepper, the owner, is going to have plenty of a say and is going to get the final say and the final okay of who they want here in Carolina. But I do think Scott Fitterer should come back for another season and be on and be attached to that new head coach and also attached to that new quarterback, which I hope will come in the first round of the 2023 NFL draft. So how those 3 individuals, Scott Fitterer, the new head coach, and the new quarterback, how they perform here in Carolina, they're all attached to each other. So if the quarterback fails, Scott fails, new head coach fails. If the head coach fails, Scott fails, quarterback fails, so on and so forth. So I do think he deserves an opportunity with an actual NFL head coach who has real NFL experience. And then if that fails, then of course Scott Fitterer should not be here in Carolina any longer.
If I were a Panthers fan, I would actually feel kind of solid about Scott Fitter being in the room and being able to use his Rolodex or whatever you want to use for contacts today to be able to go out and get that next head coach. Julian, he's not only in our contacts, he's one of our 5 favorites. So thanks for being here again. If you're here Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, burn it down.
Hopefully we are not having this conversation tomorrow.
All right, Julian Council, Locked On Panthers. You can find him there every day.